Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for a conversation with filmmakers Monika Treut and Elfi Mikesch today, co-presented by the Goethe-Institut New York, Anthology Film Archives, and the German distributor Salzgeber, as part of the ongoing film series, Female Misbehavior, the films of Monika Treut and Elfi Mikesch. My name is Sarah Stevenson. I am a program curator at the Goethe-Institut, and I am talking with you live from Hell's Kitchen, New York. For those of you not familiar with the Goethe-Institut, we are a German cultural organization with branches across the world, including 6 here in the United States. In New York, we're located at 30 Irving Place, where under normal circumstances, we present cultural events, have a library, and hold language classes. We're still here for you online, so make sure to check out our website at goethe.de/New York if you're interested in learning German from home or would like to find out more about our digital programs. I am absolutely delighted to have Monika Troyt and Elfi Mikesch here with us today. I would also like to welcome Jed Rapfogel from Anthology Film Archives and Dennis Siatko-Bergner will be helping with translation, along with our moderator, Alice Kuzniar. Today's conversation and the whole film series were originally supposed to take place in the theater here in New York, and it really broke my heart to have to tell Monika and Elfi that that would no longer be possible. So I'm really grateful that they embraced this new format. And I would also like to express my gratitude to Jed, who has helped us bringing this program and so many German films to New York audiences over the years. This film series would not have been possible without Salzgeber's generosity, technical expertise, and overall support. So a big thank you to their team, and in particular to Andreas Könemann and Björn Koll. It's been amazing to see Monika's and Elfi's films being streamed from the US and Germany to Japan, Finland, Ukraine, and so many other places. Thank you to everyone who has watched the films, and especially to those who are here with us today. It's a pleasure to introduce to you Monika Treut. Monika was born in Mönchengladbach and studied literature and political science in Marburg. Her PhD dissertation, The Cruel Woman, Female Images in the Writing of Marquis de Sade and Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, was published in 1984, the year before she co-directed her first feature with Elfi Mikesch, the controversial seduction, The Cruel Woman, which has since become a cult classic. Many other feature and documentary films about quote unquote misbehaving women followed, including some shot here in the United States, like My Father is Coming, which takes place in early 1990s New York. Some of Monika's most recent films were shot in Brazil and Taiwan. When we first got in touch with her last year, she and Elfi were in California shooting Gender Nation, in which she revisits the protagonist of her 1999 film Gender Knots. The film is currently in post-production. Elfi Mikesch was born in Judenburg, Austria, and moved to Berlin via Frankfurt am Main in the 1960s. Trained as a photographer and beautician, she started making films in 1978, winning the German Film Award in Silver for her wonderfully poetic documentary, I Often Think of Hawaii. Several other films followed, including Seduction, The Cruel Woman with Monika Treut. Her most recent film is Fever, starring the wonderful Eva Mattes. Elfi is also known as an award-winning cinematographer who collaborated with filmmakers including Rosa von Braunheim, Werner Schröter, Heinz Emigholz, and Monika Treut, among others, on some of their most well-known films. Alice Kuzniar is a professor of literary and cultural studies at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. She is the author of, among others, the award-winning The Birth of Homeopathy Out of the Spirit of Romanticism, Melancholia, Reflections on Our Animal Kinship, and The Essential, The Queer German Cinema. Now just a few words about our event today. Monika and Elfi will be in conversation with Alice for the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. While they talk, we will be taking questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send us questions throughout the event. Jed will be joining the conversation later with the audience's questions. If you should experience any problems with Zoom, you can also watch us live over on the Goethe-Institut New York's Facebook page. And last but not least, a little surprise, we are giving away 10 free tickets for the film series today. So email us at the address that I'll add to the chat in a few minutes for a chance to win. And that's it from my side. I hand over to Jed now, who's joining us live from Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and we'll say a few words before we start the conversation. Thank you.
So yeah, I'm Jed Rapfogel, as Sarah said, from Anthology Film Archives. Like she mentioned, this project initially was supposed to be a geographically specific in real life event. And unfortunately, the world intervened. So, you know, I share Sarah's deep sadness that we're not able to have Monika and Elfi here in New York. On the other hand, hopefully there is a kind of benefit in being able to open this up to people outside of the confines of New York City. So yeah, thank you again to all. I want to thank all of you, all the participants for taking part. That includes Monika and Elfi and Alice Kuzniar and Dennis Serkolbergna. And I'd like to thank the 21st Century for making it possible for this to happen in this form. And I think with that, well, and I also want to just mention that the online retrospective does continue for another week. So please, by all means, continue watching the films that you haven't seen thus far after this Q&A. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alice Kuzniar, our moderator.
Thanks, Jed. It's a thrill to be here this afternoon. I want to get to talking about where we are today with filmmaking in the time of COVID. But before we get there, I do want to talk about the large archive that we have of your work, Elfi and Monika. And just last night, I was rewatching the Mondo Lux, the film on Werner Schröter. And what came to my mind was the lovely line from Hölderlin, the German poet, was bleibt aber, stiften die Dichter. So what remains is founded by poets. And so the question I want to open with is, what have you tried to capture, hold on to, in a way save as a remnant in your filmmaking? Sort of, was wolltet ihr stiften in euren Filmen? So maybe with Elfi and Monika, you could unmute.
So I'm on. All right. That's a big question, Alice. Well, I guess it's with each film, it's kind of a different aspect of human life we try to capture. Right. So on one hand, when we look back at our films, it's kind of, as you said, big archive of situations we have lived in. On the other hand, I also don't see it as our films as a museum or so of situations, because each Befindlichkeit in German, each situation we capture is also such a way of the human condition that we can also project it into the future, right? When I go to the most recent work I've done, the new movie Generation, it tries to build a bridge between the times of the pioneers of transgenderism back in the 80s and 90s and projected into the now time and you know, trying to see how it evolves over time, the how to deal with transgenderism, how to deal with all these big changes in biographies, in the biographies of these pioneers. You know what I try to say. So it's not like, I don't really like to look back in a way, but to kind of like to build bridges into the now time, and to, you know, to give ideas how we can deal with certain really deep human problems.
Mm-hmm. Elfi?
Yes. For me, it's good to see in my notice. This is very short, and it's the essence of my film working and our film working, Monika and mine. Und Dennis könnte das jetzt übersetzen, weil es geht schneller. Und ich mache kurze Absätze, damit alles gesagt wird. Ja? Dennis, okay?
Ja, sicher.
Was haben unsere Filme oder auch mein Film heute für einen Sinn?
So what's the sense of my film or our films today?
Für mich ist es die Besinnung. Also welchen Sinn haben sie in unserer Zeit, auch die älteren Filme? Denn die älteren Filme sind ja kein Museum und sie sind auch nicht nostalgisch, sondern sie sind die Perspektive in die Zukunft.
So for me, it's always the perspective of also the older films on today and what sense they make in today's world. So they are not a museum, but more a perspective of a vision of today's world.
Es ist eine Ressource. Film ist eine Ressource und ich betrachte unsere Arbeit als Ressource für morgen. Und gerade jetzt in dieser sehr kritischen Zeit, das Filmprogramm ist nicht Ausdruck einer Nostalgie, sondern die Filme zeigen durch ihre Thematiken und durch die Ereignisse neue Perspektiven.
So I see the films as a resource for today, and it shows a perspective on today's world.
Es ist nichts mehr so selbstverständlich, wie es bisher erschien. Und ich denke, dass nie etwas selbstverständlich ist. Und das kommt besonders deutlich in Monikas Filme, weil es geht um einen Kampf der Identität, der Geschlechter, der Selbstfindung. Und das sind ungeheuer schwierige Prozesse.
So we have to look at films as not self-explanatory. So they've never been self-explanatory before, and they are not today. And I see that in Monika's film because they are a fight always.
Deshalb kann gerade heute etwas möglich werden, woran wir gestern noch gar nicht gedacht haben. Und es hängt mit unserem Gedächtnis zusammen. Und Filme sind Gedächtnis.
So films are our mind or our collective mind, and so it is possible that things are possible today that never have been possible before.
Und jemand hat einmal gesagt, der Gedächtnisverlust in unserer Gesellschaft ist erschreckend.
So someone has said before that the collective amnesia is very frightening.
Und dass wir unsere Träume vergessen, das, was wir uns wünschen. Und das ist besonders wichtig für Kinder, die das gerade lernen, oder für Jugendliche.
And it's especially important to not forget about our dreams. It's especially important for young people and younger generations to hold on to their dreams.
Und ich denke oft an Hawaii, mein erster Dokumentarfilm, handelt von dieser Geschichte. Und Carmen, das junge Mädchen, 16 Jahre alt, hat einen großen Lebenswunsch. Ich wünsche mir ein glückliches Leben ohne Streit. Das sagt Carmen in diesem Film. Und mit Streit meint Carmen Hass, Neid und Ungerechtigkeit.
So that's basically what my first documentary is about. I often think of Hawaii. We see a young woman, Carmen, she's 16 years old, and she has something very important on her mind, and it's the fight against hatred, against injustice, against envy.
Und das ist genau das, was Monika vorhin gesagt hat, über die Essenz des Lebens. Und ich denke oft an Hawaii ist eine Einladung einer Familie aus sogenannten einfachen Verhältnissen.
So it's exactly what Monika has said before about films as an essence. And I often think of Hawaii exemplifies that. And it's about a family of so-called simpler meanings. But it exemplifies especially what film as an essence is about.
Und es ist, der Film ist eine Einladung, jetzt Hawaii, aber auch Monikas Filme, denke ich, ist eine Einladung, sich mit diesen Geschichten zu befassen, die nicht sehr einfach sind und vor allem zuzuhören. Also bei Hawaii ist durch den Alltag zu gehen, sie zu begleiten und ihnen zuzuhören. Es sind die Stimmen, die überhört werden. Und ich habe den Film gemacht, weil mich Sprachlosigkeit erschreckt, Ohnmacht und Gewalt.
So both of those films, I often think of Hawaii, but also Monika's films are more of an invitation to kind of go into those worlds. And I have a very big problem with speechlessness. So I made a film about this, about speechlessness and envy and all those feelings.
Das heißt, Diskriminierung aller Art, Unterdrückung aller Art. Und ich denke, das ist jetzt der erste Absatz. Und ich bitte jetzt, ja, ich danke erstmal.
So it means that injustices of all kinds, discriminations of all kinds, I'm very frightened of that. And that's why I made these films.
Okay, thank you so much for the extensive response. It's so true that the film, I think often about Hawaii, is a film, even though it's the oldest film in our archive for the anthology, it's a film that really has a message for today too, when so many of us are sort of locked inside of our apartments still. What we could talk about more would be, and I'm still going to come back to that beautiful passage in Hölderlin, because what I think both of you capture is the moment, is the gesture, is a certain style that comes across so much with the individual characters that you are portraying on the screen. Really beautiful persons. But some of these characters are often searching for a bleiben. They're searching for a sense of home, but they're also searching for a sense of transcendence, often via masochistic encounters. So I was curious what you think your various characters from, say, My Father is Coming, all the way to something like Phoeba, find.
Mm-hmm. Again, it's kind of hard to compare these films or to find a common thread, I find, you know. It's
hard to find questions.
Yeah, that's a way. I think it's a very academic way to find certain threads, and sometimes academics are much better that way, you know.
Well, talk about whatever you would like to.
Okay. I think for me, the situation is really important. When I really have to come back to the most recent work because I'm just in the middle of post-production. And when I look at this specific film, we just shot in San Francisco and all over California and in Denver, Colorado. it shows really it wasn't even intended that much, but it shows how hard it is for people to have a home, actually. You can really feel the burning problems of our times through these films, especially through the documentary films. In Generation, you see the effect gentrification has on people's lives. For example, Max Wolf Valerio, the poet, I made a film about him when he started his journey from female to male back in the early 90s, when he lived in San Francisco. Now he's been thrown out into Colorado. He lived with his parents for a long time because as a poet and a writer, he couldn't just he couldn't afford to live in San Francisco any longer. So you see that there is a big influence on our state of capitalism on people all over the world. You see that the cities which have been the points, the locations of desire, like a city like San Francisco, has been changed so fundamentally from like a city of dreams into a city of, where people from Silicon Valley live now. It's like, a city where you have BlackRock and you have like all the headquarters of the big digital companies, and how much the everyday life of people has been changed through these developments. So we can't really help it. I mean, especially when you do make documentary films and you have a certain subject, the film is really full of references to the signs of our times, which, I think it's really important to show these influences. You can't just say, okay, I'm making a film about gender, but, where do these people live? What's going on in their lives?
So can I follow up then a little bit there, Monika, with talking about Gender Nation? The films that you have made in the past have been really empowering for lesbians and for transgender folk. And can you maybe talk about how even now, despite, these different kinds of problems you're addressing, about this empowering aspect of filmmaking for you, die bevollmächtigende Aspekte der Filme machen?
I think I can only make films about people I really like and have a relation to, and the protagonist especially of these documentary films need to trust me as a filmmaker. So that's really important to have, to be in close contact for me to make a documentary film. And so I'm probably looking for people who have not only an interesting life story, but also have a very vital presence for a movie, a vital presence where they can communicate not only with me as a filmmaker or with Elfi as a cinematographer, because this way they can communicate with the audience as well. So in a way, we are as filmmakers kind of the medium through which an audience can experience the protagonists and can kind of really be in touch with their world, the world they are living in, and can communicate very closely to them as well. So that's always the goal, to do that. And if when we reach this point of contact with the protagonist, then it's mostly possible that the audience can connect as well. And I guess, you need a certain rapport with these people to be able to manage this direct communication. But I didn't quite answer your question, I guess. I think it's more about the way of...
About the, just talk about the empowering aspects.
Yeah, well, actually, that's funny. I think a lot of filmmaking, or the way I'm making films, it's not really that intentional in terms of, I just want to create a contact. But what the audience does with this type of contact, it's not up to me in a way. So I just, when a film is finished, the film really gets complete by the audience reactions. And it's not really in our control, because as independent filmmakers, we don't do formula films, right? So in certain types of filmmaking, you have really rules and formulas where you can really from the very beginning can make the math. Okay, you do this and the audience is supposed to feel that. So with our films, I think each of our films, it's an experiment in itself, you know? So it's always a surprise when you first show the film, what the audience does with it. If a film is empowering for, let's say, queer people, for trans people, then it's wonderful. But it's not, you know, it's really hard to totally influence this as a filmmaker, at least in the works that what I'm doing. And I think for Elfi, it's pretty much similar. You know, we try to do something, and then we are really curious how the audience is reacting. And that's suspenseful, and that's exciting, and that's why we love to be in touch with audiences. And this is why this type of Zoom meeting is, you know, for us, only half of the fun and half of the experience we can have.
Elfi, maybe could you come and talk about your more recent film, Fever, if you would like to, Fever, perhaps in terms of, as well, this notion of a sort of coming back to my original question about a sort of a longing for some kind of transcendence, a longing, but also a longing for remembrance.
Ich möchte nochmal zurückkommen zu dem, was Monika gesagt hat.
I want to come back quickly on what Monika has said.
Zu unserer Filmarbeit.
To our film work.
Es ist der Dialog, der Monika und mich über die vielen Jahre verbindet. Und es sind Geschichten und Biografien, wie sie auch gesagt hat. Sie werden durch das Medium Film zur Geschichte und zu einem visuellen Gedächtnis und damit zu Perspektiven, die wir heute so dringend brauchen, weil es herrscht auch Ratlosigkeit und eine Hilflosigkeit, Not und
Okay, so I want to come back on our films. It's mostly about dialogues, about stories and biographies, and they form a sort of a visual consciousness.
Und es ist ja schön, 3 Beispiele zu haben, und Fieber, was erwähnt wurde. Der Film thematisiert in einer Familiengeschichte die Verstrickung durch Verdrängung. Und es ist die koloniale Vergangenheit, die einen Schatten auf eine Familie wirft. Der Vater, ein ehemaliger Fremdenlegionär in Nordafrika.
So it's important to have three examples. One of them is my most recent film, Fever, and it's about a family history's entanglement in memories of the father being a foreign legionnaire. And it's about colonialism and the story of the family being entangled into that.
Und die Tochter, inzwischen im Film über 60 Jahre alt, reflektiert dieses Leben ihr eigenes Leben und das Leben des Vaters und der Familie.
It's the protagonist is the daughter who is 60 years old now, and she reflects upon her family history, but also about the history of colonialism entangled into that family history.
Das ist der eine Film. Der nächste Film ist Mondo Lux, ein Film über den Filmregisseur Werner Schröter und Theaterregisseur und seine Bilderwelten. Ich habe für ihn Kamera gemacht und Mondo Lux ist ein biografisches Porträt und es geht um die Frage zur Musik, zur Kunst und zum Leben und die Frage, was bleibt. Das können wir grundsätzlich fragen. Was bleibt?
So, and the second film I want to take as an example is Mondo Lux. It is a film about the image worlds of the director Werner Schröter, and it's about this. I was a cinematography with this film. I was a cinematographer with a lot of his works, and this is a film about art, about his life, and about the very big question about what remains.
Und das trifft die Essenz. Und ich denke, der Hawaii-Film, der auf Menschen zugeht und die Menschen sprechen lässt. Und wir kommen zu einem ganz wichtigen Punkt in unserer Zeit, Empathie.
So the first example, Hawaii, it's a film about people and about letting them speak. And it's about a very important subject to me in our days. It's about empathy.
Was bedeutet heute Empathie? Und ich denke, es hat zu tun mit unserer Perspektive für die Zukunft.
So, what's the meaning of empathy? And I think it reflects upon the future.
Und es öffnet für uns Möglichkeiten, auf das einander zugehen. Wir brauchen das. Es ist wie das Atmen, wie der Sauerstoff.
So it's really something we need to talk to each other, and it's something like air that we breathe. We really need it.
Und ohne Sauerstoff können wir nicht atmen.
And without the air, we can't breathe. So it's the same with empathy.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a beautiful line in that Mondo Lux where Werner Schröter says, Kunst ist Freundschaft, so art is friendship. And I think that collaboration that you've had, the two of you over the years, but then Elfi, with your collaboration as well too, with Rosa von Braunheim, with Werner Schröter, really demonstrate how then the Freundschaft also becomes, or friendship also becomes art. Could you say a little bit more, Elfi, about what you might be working on right now?
Right now? Right now?
If it's possible.
Yes, it is, but I will come back to Monika's film and the work on this film, the camera work. Und was für mich so gravierend war, dass sie über eine lange Zeit die Menschen begleitet, um ihr Leben zeigen zu können. Und zwar nicht ausgestellt, sondern mit Empathie.
So what's really important for me is in terms of being a cinematographer and in terms of making films is to really be with the people you film and to really show them and not show them in a way that's just showing them, but also with empathy.
Und ich habe erlebt in San Francisco oder auf unserer Reise nach Santa Cruz die Nachrichten im Fernsehen, die Brände. Es hat gebrannt. Und diese Atmosphäre prägt auch den Film. Es brennt und es brennt für die Leute, die Monika in ihrem Film und in ihrer Biografie darstellt. Und dieses brennende Leben, das ist im Grunde für mich die Perspektive, dorthin sollten wir schauen und schauen, wie können wir damit leben. Und das ist ein Angebot. Das ist ein Appell, bestimmte Sachen jetzt auch durch Corona ändern zu können.
So what struck me most while filming in Santa Cruz and San Francisco was that it was burning everywhere, and it really was the essence of the film, that about those people and their lives and the burning surroundings. And it's really something we might look at now with Corona happening and with COVID. What can we change about the ways we live?
Und was bringt es zutage? Ja, was kommt zum Vorschein? Das ist unsere Chance und das ist die Hoffnung.
And also, what does it show? So it's a chance that we can take, and it's also full of hope.
Yeah, I would like to come back to Alice's question about friendship. Filmmaking is also an expression of friendship and collaboration. What Elfi and I could experience over so many years. It is also, for me, filmmaking is also an amazing medium for staying in touch and networking with people in different cultures. So, for example, I've made this movie, Warrior of Light, in Brazil, and I made a follow-up film called Zona Norte, where we could accompany the project over 20 years pretty much, from the very beginnings of this project, when Yvonne Bezerro de Mello, a human rights worker, started her school with kids in the favelas of Rio, and how this project evolved over time. And so this is, once you made a documentary about certain people, a certain group of people, a certain situation, like in the favelas of Rio, we as filmmakers are really connected with these people for life. So it's like we follow them, we keep being in touch with them, we talk to them. And so it's kind of a life changing situation pretty much when you once start going into a situation like in the favelas of Rio, or the situation in Taiwan. So we are connected. Once we work with human rights activists in Taiwan, we are connected for life. So that's an amazing, that's kind of the reward, one of the rewards of making independent, especially independent documentaries, that we are deeply and strongly connected with all the protagonists we've ever worked with. It's an amazing kind of enrichment of our lives, and how can I say, I mean, we are going into this kind of, we're getting out of our shells. You know, I live here in Hamburg, which is a pretty secure town right now. But through these contacts, through filmmaking, we are kind of interconnected in a really deep way. And I couldn't even imagine a different type of life.
And you also have that ability then to convey then that connectedness to your viewer, you know, wherever we might be then. And what I've always admired tremendously in your documentaries, Monika, is that word empathy that Elfi Mikesch just used. That empathy that you have with the people who you're filming. So I think maybe this might be a good time to open the floor to questions from the audience. To see sort of what has come to their mind. And I think I'm going to pass it over to Jed.
Sure. There are so far no questions from the audience, I'm afraid. But I don't mind asking. I mean, if you have questions that you're burning to ask Alice, you can continue. If not, I do have a question or two of my own if you want to just add another voice or something like that.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, let's see. I have a couple questions. I mean, I guess I would start with a sort of specific one, just because it connects exactly to what you were just talking about art as friendship and about staying in touch with people. I mean, it's very interesting that you've continued to go back to people and you know, make kind of documentary sequels in a sense. But specifically, I'm just curious about the beginning of those relationships. I'm thinking about films, excuse me, like Virgin Machine and My Father Is Coming, especially leading into gender knots. I'm curious if you if those communities, to what extent you felt like you were part of those communities before you made the films, and to what extent you kind of, by the time of gender knots, you felt yourself to be in some sense a part of that community. Is that something that kind of came out of making those early films, or did it pre-exist?
Well, I think it's a mutual influence. I mean, I've always lived in you know, with different queer communities, or, you know, with the international queer community. I think also a very important part of that is the network of queer film festivals. That's a very important venue or venues for us filmmakers to connect with audiences, to connect with like-minded filmmakers, and you know, to meet new people, to get inspired. And so I think it's a two-way communication always. And for example, my connection with trans people, of course, I'm myself, you know, in a way, could say I'm, you know, I have certain gender dysphoria also, you know, but I think I've always been attracted to people who are not, you know, like your normal person, always, like Elfi as well. So we've always been in touch with people who are a little bit different. And so I guess the first piece I made about a trans person was Max, a short film. And it happened just because I knew Max when he was Anita, and we were in the same, you know, in the same group, and we had friends in common. So it was a very natural and easy film to make. It was just a film, a portrait of a friend. And so from one friend, it started to, there was more friends coming in. And when one film like Max made its rounds, and trans people thought they were represented in a very respectful way, so other trans people came and said, hey, why don't we make another film, or why don't you do a portrait of us? So that's how Gender Knots pretty much came about. It was at the time when trans people were represented on, especially on American talk shows like Freaks or Strange People or Weirdos, when we started making, you know, different portraits. And people thought, you know, especially trans people thought that I had respect, and I liked them, and so they could trust me, right? Though I'm not trans myself. I think these days there is also a certain problem arising in queer communities, that people identify very much in a very specific way. And what I find, and what I also try to show in my new film, Generation, is that we should all be much closer together, because the real enemy is somewhere else. And we should, you know, we should all, like, I think somebody said, if we don't hang together, we'll be hanging separately, you know. So we should, I think we should really see where our common enemy is sitting right now, and, you know, should just start not to be too much about our small differences, and we shouldn't be so hostile with each other about smaller identity problems. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, actually, I wondered about that in gender.
Mm-hmm.
You did, no, for sure. I wondered about that in Gender Knots. I wondered if that was something, if that dynamic existed at all, and you chose not to emphasize it, or was that really not a part of the community, as far as you could tell?
I think when we shot Gender Knots, that was back in the late 90s in San Francisco. The queer community was much more open. So we had this beautiful club called Club Confidential, where all types of queer people, trans people, straight people would all come together, art-minded people, artsy people. So it was just a beautiful mix of people. And it since has become more divided, I believe, from my experience. And it was some kind of utopian get-together, which we've lost a bit these days. But, you know, who knows? It could come together again, and I would very much hope for that these differences would become smaller these days.
Monika, we have a question here that has to do not with San Francisco, but with New York City. And the question is, when was your last visit to the East Village, and how has it changed since, say, 1988? And it also made me think about that whole, that archive that your film now presents, these historical documents that we have of the East Village, of San Francisco, back in the 80s and early 90s. Do you want to answer that question about that change and that kind of historical documentation?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question in terms of how much has the city changed from back then. I've lived in New York in the late 80s and early 90s. And back then we had all these beautiful places in the city. I remember one of my favorite nightclubs was Esqualita. It was a Latin nightclub where there was amazing drag shows, and it was unbelievably beautiful, and was great music, was great shows. And I believe a lot of these beautiful places are gone now. They do not longer exist. And, you know, we all know why that is, but it's so sad. And I'm actually, I was very curious to come back now for this series at the Anthology Archives. But unfortunately, we are here. Everybody is in their separate little room because the stark, really amazing, big changes of New York, I haven't experienced that much. I haven't been back much. I've been back, I think, 8 years ago, and it was already stark changes to see back then. But I guess right now, especially with the pandemic, New York is changing very much. So I would actually love to hear more about it, but I guess the audience can't talk to us directly, right? So it's a one-way situation, a little bit like that, huh? Yeah. Okay.
We have a question for Elfi. Should we go to this? We actually have several, I think, interesting questions here. Is that cool, Alice, to go for this first question about Hawaii? The question is, I really enjoyed, I often think of Hawaii, a very powerful film. Elfi, can you speak a bit about the role of Puerto Rico as an imaginary in Germany at the time, and Puerto Rican diasporic identities? And also, if you could just speak about your relationship with the protagonists of that film.
Ich habe dieses schöne Bild gesehen von Carmen heute, ja, dieses Porträt dieses jungen Mädchens, was mich so fasziniert hat. Sie war unsere Nachbarin. Ich sah dieses Mädchen mit ihrem Bruder in unserem Hinterhof spielen, ja.
So maybe Antonia. So again today, when I saw the beautiful image of Carmen, I must say she used to be our neighbor, and I often saw her and her brother playing together.
Und mich faszinierte dann ihre Geschichte und ich dachte, sie ist erzählenswert. Ihr kann ich in das Gesicht sehen. Sie hat ein Gesicht, das wenig spricht. Also sie war sehr schweigsam.
So and I found her story very interesting, and when I looked into her face, I realized she has a face that hardly ever speaks.
Und ihre Geschichte, um das jetzt noch mal kurz in Erinnerung zu bringen: Die Mutter, eine Putzfrau, alleinerziehend.
And about her story, which I found very interesting, she has a mother that is a single parent and is a cleaning woman.
Und mit all den Beschwerden, also das Arbeitsfeld ist sehr, sehr mühsam, anstrengend, schwere Arbeit.
And her work is full of hardship.
Sie möchte den Kindern ein schönes Leben bieten und Bildung.
She wants to provide a good life for her children and also education.
Der Vater ist verschollen, denn er hat der Mutter versprochen, ich möchte dir die Welt zeigen.
So the father is absent, and he had promised to his wife that he wanted to show her the world.
Er ist GI gewesen und hatte diese kurze Zeit mit der Frau. Die 2 Kinder sind entstanden. Und was in diesem Film dramatisch ist, ist der Verlust. Die Kinder erleiden einen Verlust. Sie haben keinen Vater. Die Mutter hat diese schwere Arbeit. Und dann entstehen die Träume. Die Träume und ihre Kraft ist es, diese Träume zu bewahren. Ich denke oft an Hawaii.
So the father used to be a GI, and he was only stationed in Germany for a very short time, in which he met the mother then, and they had 2 kids together. And so the big trauma of those kids is to never have met their father. And that's where, and also the hardship of the mother and her work. And so that's where those dreams about Hawaii become very powerful.
Es ist eine ganz einfache Geschichte und in einfachen Worten. Und es sind einfache alltägliche Probleme, die wir alle kennen, also die besonders natürlich in einfachen Verhältnissen leben, wenig Geld haben, keinen Luxus, putzen, stumme Kommunikation, Fußball, ja. Und in dem Film können wir aber ihren Träumen auf den Grund gehen. Und es ist wichtig, und das ist der Sinn, einen Traum zu haben. Und darum denke ich, dass dieser Film oder auch der Film über Brasilien, den Monika gemacht hat, das sind arme, einfache Leute und wir dürfen sie nicht vergessen. Sie sind da, um uns etwas zu zeigen.
So the story about the film is a very simple story, and it's told with simple words, and it's about daily problems that we all know. It's about having no luxuries. It's about, you know, those soccer games in the backyard, and but it's also about a very important thing. It's about having a dream, and this is also what Monika's film about Brazil is really about. So it's very important to hold on to those dreams and to never forget them.
Und so ist die Hoffnung unsere Perspektive, so wie unsere Filme Perspektiven aufzeigen. Und es ist gerade jetzt ein Neubeginn. Danke.
Hopefully.
So our hope is to show those perspectives and to show a perspective and to hopefully have a new beginning now. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions here too that have to do with other films that you've made about girls and horses, which is really a favorite of mine, a beautiful depiction of animals. in that film, Monika. But there is also a question here too about some of your other work, Elfi, like Marocain in particular. I think it has been so difficult over the years, and I think especially now with sort of the prevalence of Netflix, there is really a diminishing of access to some filmmaking. So Elfi, could you say maybe more about how one can come to watch more of your films, like Marocain?
Dennis, kannst du mir das nochmal kurz wiederholen? Ich habe das schlecht verstanden.
Ja, also es geht darum, wo man denn deine Filme sehen kann. Also zum Beispiel Marocain, genau, und quasi das mit Netflix immer mehr quasi ein Monopol auf die Filme entstanden ist und wo man dann Filme wie die deinigen sehen kann heutzutage.
Es ist eine wunderbare Möglichkeit, die Kinemathek hier in Berlin, Freunde der deutschen Kinemathek, restaurieren jetzt meine Filme. Hawaii war der erste Film, den sie gemacht haben. Jetzt passiert der Film, was sollen wir denn machen ohne den Tod?
So there's a wonderful institution here in Berlin. It's the Cinematheque and the Friends of the Cinematheque. They are doing restoration of my films now. They did, I often think of Hawaii, and they're now doing, können Sie nochmal wiederholen, den Film?
Was sollen wir denn machen ohne den Tod?
What shall we do without death? So they're now working on that film.
Dann haben wir zum Glück Verführung, die grausame Frau. Der ist abrufbar, auch über Salzgeber Medien, und Monikas Filme sind zum Glück mehr verfügbar als meine. Aber in den nächsten 3-4 Jahren wird auch Marocain zu sehen sein oder Mondolux ist zu sehen oder auch Fieber ist zu erwerben über das Internet.
So some of my other films are available through the Salzgeber Club, which I'm very thankful to. And also a lot of Monika Treut's films are available. And in the next upcoming 3 to 4 years, a lot of my other films will be made available as well. For example, Marocain, you will be able to see, and also Mondo Lux is available, and Fever. They are both available.
Thank you.
Great news. Jed, is there another question there that you want to pull out of the Q&A?
I would highlight this one. There's a question about whether this is specifically for Monika, but I think you can both speak to it, about how different the responses have been to your films from audiences in Germany versus in the United States.
That's quite interesting. I believe it's wherever we are, whether we are in Berlin or Hamburg or Taipei or Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, or New York or San Francisco, it's that's the big hope for now and also for the future. I mean, the people are pretty much having the same questions, the same problems, and the same interests. So I can't really say that there is such a different way of viewing films or reacting to the films because, well, as I said, you know, we are pretty much the same people wherever we are, you know, and the world is so small these days. We can feel it right now with the pandemic. We are all pretty close together, more or less.
Do you want to speak to that, Elfi? No?
Wollten Sie noch was sagen?
Ja, nein, das war nur eine kleine Korrektur vom Licht, weil es dunkel wird.
Okay, so there's no comment on this.
Sure.
Okay, there's a question here for you, Monika, from your old friend, Killer BTW, who asked the question, if you believe it's hopeful despite the features or factors of gentrification, can we develop new communities outside of these metropolitan cities, creating a new kind of counterculture? And I just want to sort of segue in as well too, that one of the lines that I just loved in the Mondo Lux film was that Schröter talked about how it's necessary, einen Gegenentwurf von Wirklichkeit herzustellen, sort of assembling a counter design to reality. So can you talk about that? Maybe different kind of counter design, countercultures that are still possible that you're envisaging? Perhaps also especially now at a time of COVID.
Well, there is an example of maybe a new counterculture in areas like in the desert, southeast of Los Angeles. Stafford, who is one of the wonderful protagonists of my new film, Generation, has moved to the desert, and land is still cheap there. So one of his goals is to build a new community with friends around the area where he lives, and it has already started. There is quite some people who've already moved out there because living is cheap, land is cheap, and you know, people can support each other, build new communities, take care of each other. So I guess there is a lot of new projects here and there in different countries and different spaces, different areas where, you know, new countercultural life can start. I don't want to say too much about it because I think Stafford is the one to really ask, and I think Killer knows Stafford too. So yeah, but I see new life coming up. So, and there is hope in any case. And there's also ideas in cities like my hometown, Hamburg, how to have new forms of collective living here and building groups and, you know, trying to fight gentrification that way collectively. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. And my apologies to Killer for not quite understanding what the BTW stood for. Sorry, by the way.
So I think we have time for just one more at this point, probably. Alice, do you want to either ask that question or select that question?
Okay. Or Jed, did you want to follow up with something here? Because I think I've covered a lot of things, but maybe we could ask, close with Elfi to talk about what you would think is necessary for this kind of Gegenentwurf von Wirklichkeit, sort of this counter design, especially today in a time where we're so isolated from each other. Are there thoughts that you've had about that, Elfi?
Nochmal genau zu sein, bitte nochmal Chat. Dennis, kannst du bitte nochmal die Frage mir in Deutsch sagen?
Also es ging darum, dass quasi im Mondo Lux dieser Satz vorkommt von Werner Schröter, es braucht einen Gegenentwurf zur Realität. Und quasi, was denn deiner Meinung nach heute dieser Gegenentwurf wäre oder wie der aussehen könnte und was deine Gedanken dazu sind.
Ich finde das eine sehr schöne Frage, weil was heißt Gegenentwurf? Werner hat seinen Film gemacht, Abfallprodukte der Liebe, und das beinhaltet die Wirklichkeit und was bleibt. Was sind Abfallprodukte der Liebe? Das ist eine Frage. Und das ist auch meine Orientierung zur Ästhetik. Und das ist egal, ob ich jetzt verschiedene Kameraarbeiten mache. Es ist das Gesicht, es ist die Körpersprache und wie sehe ich sie und was mache ich für Bilder, was machen wir für Bilder, weil wir fotografieren alle mit Handy und so weiter und so fort. Das ist ein Universum. Und was machen die Bilder mit uns? Was machen wir mit den Bildern? Und wenn wir dieser Frage auf den Grund gehen, dann haben wir den Gegenentwurf.
Okay, so thank you for this beautiful question. Well, what Werner Schröter said was also about the film Abfallprodukte der Liebe, which is a lot about the aesthetic and the face, about body language. And as a cinematographer, I'm kind of focusing on those parts and aspects. And it's mostly about what images are we presenting, and what do the images tell us. So it's kind of all those aspects of filmmaking. Vielleicht nochmal speziell Abfallprodukte der Liebe. Ja, könnten Sie nochmal drauf eingehen, was genau dieser Gegenentwurf dann sein könnte?
Abfallprodukte der Liebe. Also das ist das, was von der Liebe bleibt. Das ist unsere Kommunikation, unsere zwischenmenschliche Aktivität. Das ist Empathie. Empathie sind Abfallprodukte der Liebe, weil es ist, wie sprechen wir mit unserer Welt, mit unserem Gegenüber? Warum machen wir Filme? Was ist dieser Sinn? Und ich denke für mich, wir haben jetzt eine große Chance, nochmal von vorne anzufangen. Aber wir gehen jetzt auf der Straße und was sehen wir? Wir sehen unsere Augen. Und wir können in unseren Augen lesen. Und das haben wir viel zu wenig genutzt. Und das ist eine Möglichkeit, auch das ist ein Gegenentwurf. Was machen wir mit den Blicken unserer Mitmenschen? Oder wie interpretieren wir sie?
Back to the Abfallprodukte der Liebe can be translated as something like side products of love, or actually like the trash products of love. And it's really about love, and about the counter images, and how we walk around right now. It's kind of a new beginning. When you wear a mask, you only see the eyes, and actually it's interesting about thinking about the images we see now, and also about what can you interpret now with the eyes you see and with the parts of the face you see. So it's a new beginning actually for making films and for seeing films.
Ich habe ein schönes Beispiel. Sandy Stone, ja, Monikas Film und die Protagonistin in diesem Film. Vor 20 Jahren habe ich sie kennengelernt und es ist unglaublich, was in dieser Zeit geschehen ist und was in diesem Gesicht sichtbar wird durch die Zeit. Und das betrifft uns alle.
So I have an example. One of Monika's films, there's a protagonist, Sandy Stone. And it's really interesting what I've realized when I look into her face now, and I'm seeing the differences from 20 years ago, and that's really the essence.
Und es sind alle Menschen, die in diesem Film auftauchen, die erzählen mir etwas über Vergänglichkeit, über die Möglichkeiten, die es gibt. Und ich glaube, das ist ein Geschenk. Und wenn wir das nicht verschleudern oder zerstören durch Gehässigkeit, durch Diskriminierung, durch all diese Eigenschaften, die wir haben auch, also ich meine auch die negativen, dass wir nicht unsere Mitmenschen quälen und ihnen Schmerz zufügen. Das beginnt bei den Kindern, das sind die Frauen, das sind die benachteiligt sind. Und wenn wir uns jetzt besinnen auf diese Möglichkeiten, dann haben wir den Gegenentwurf.
So it's really about the possibilities, and about that we managed to have a counter image of like what's happening now with discriminations, with all the negative aspects of like human beings, with torture and against women and kids. And if we really manage to kind of turn this around now, then there's a chance for us for the future.
Und das ist der Gegenentwurf, den auch Werner gemeint hat mit seinen Filmen. Es war die Zeit, die Nachkriegszeit, und er sagte, wir müssen andere Filme machen. Ich muss andere Filme machen. Was heißt das? Also wir können nicht die alten Muster fortsetzen, als wäre nichts geschehen.
So that's also what Werner Schröter meant with counter images, because it's about the time after the world wars, and about that no one can make cinema again like it was before. So it's really about changing things and about trying to work with that and not making the same films that we used to make before.
Und ich denke, in Monikas Film, also Generation, das sagt ja auch der Titel, da ist eine Generation, die sich wechselt, ja, von jung zu alt, und das geht immer so weiter. Das ist das Angebot, die Vielfältigkeit anzuschauen, auch die ganzen Problematiken.
So also in Monika's film, in Generation, there's gender and generation in this in the title, and it's really about the time passing and about seeing diversity.
Und wir haben jetzt eine neue Generation, die jungen Leute, die sagen, bitte verändert es, macht etwas, tut etwas. Ja? Es kann nicht so weitergehen, dazu gehören die Kriege, das brauche ich gar nicht aufzuzählen. Wir wissen es. Wir können nicht sagen, wir wissen es nicht.
So there's a new generation that asks for a big change, and we can't really live life as we did before, and we can't really say that we don't know it anymore. So there's really a very big demand for change, and we should listen to this.
Thank you.
Great. And you know, since we only have one outstanding question that we haven't asked yet, I've been granted permission to go ahead and ask that last question. And so this is okay, the question is about academic research and how academic research comes to influence art making. Specifically, Monika, the questioner is wondering how your dissertation on Saad and Zakir Masok ultimately influenced the representations in Seduction.
Oh. Well, I think, okay, now we're going back to the very first films in the 80s. Yeah, I think the academic work actually helped Elfi and me to have a distinct concept for colors, for the rhythm of the film, for you know, how we could stage masochistic desire, because like I was analyzing Venus in Furs, the famous novel by Zakir Masok, and when you analyze this work of writing, we learned quite a bit how to transfer this into film, into colors, into the importance of fetishes and staging of desire. So it was very helpful actually to talk about this with Elfi and you know, to make it fruitful, to have academic analysis going into a different direction, to actually use it for you know, how to build the sets and how to really enrich the narrative with ideas we could find from analyzing literature. So it was kind of a very nice marriage of literature and film on this level. Yeah, and it was very beautiful to have Elfi as a cinematographer come into that dialogue between film, literature, and analysis. It was, I think, quite fruitful for the two of us, if that's an answer to the question.
Yeah. Elfi, did you want to speak to that as well?
Sprichst du zu mir?
Elfi, did you want to answer that?
Bitte nochmal die Frage.
Genau, es ging quasi darum, wie die akademische Forschung, vor allem die Arbeit zu Zakir Masok und Saad, quasi die Arbeit zur Verführung befruchtet hat, und ob du auch noch irgendwas dazu sagen möchtest.
Ich komme ja aus Österreich und da ist ein großes Gebiet mit dieser gesellschaftlichen Befindlichkeit. Also Sadomasochismus ist nicht umsonst, taucht Freud auf und geht tief in die Seele. Und was mich fasziniert hat, ich bin ja nicht jetzt in dieser akademischen Sphäre zu Hause, aber in der konkreten, die da ein Gesellschaftsbild zeigt, das Monika und ich auf den Tisch gelegt haben, wie ein Operationstisch. Sie hat ja auch gesagt, es ist die Analyse dieser Geschichte von Sadomaso. Und wir versuchten dann ein zeitgenössisches Bild herzustellen zur grausamen Frau, die ein Rollenbild ist, aber auch ein Gesellschaftsbild, Teil einer Gesellschaft.
I'm from Austria, and it's not, yeah, it's also the connection with Sigmund Freud, of course, and there's a big sadomasochist, the community, like, yeah, it's very in the history of the country, and Freud looks deep into the soul, and so what we try to do is really make a contemporary work out of it, and use it more as a kind of a surgical table. And Monika and I wanted to show not only the role of the cruel woman in that sense, but also what it means in a more contemporary sense, and in a more sense of what it means for society.
Monika, können wir jetzt den Dialog weiterführen? Du bist die Spezialistin der Theorie auch gewesen, was ganz und gar wichtig ist, um überhaupt das Problem zu öffnen, diesen sadomasochistischen Körper zu öffnen und zugänglich zu machen und zu sagen, es ist eine theatralische Inszenierung, es ist ein Spiel, und das ist bereits ein Teil der Auflösung, der Erkenntnis.
Naja, wir waren ja natürlich auch sehr anarchistisch auf dem Level, dass wir diese grausame Frau, die bei Sache, oh, no, sorry, now
yeah.
speaking
one moment.
Sorry.
So Elfi Mikesch is going into the dialogue now with Monika, and asking her to kind of go more into the work and what they did before during the time of the filming. So yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was slipping back into German. Elfi, I think what we did then was also, we were very anarchistic that way. We took the cruel woman, which who is in Sadomaso's work, a projection of the male fantasy. We just took her out, we freed her from the corset of a male masochistic fantasy, and we put her in the spotlight as a cruel woman, as a dominatrix. So we just got her out of the framework of masochism, and I think that was part of why the film at first got quite violent reactions, especially by men, by straight men at the time. So remember in the beginning, we had a lot of problems, but later on, so the film became a little cult classic. So that's really wonderful. All right.
Well, I think maybe we can wrap up slowly, and then I want to walk away from this entire Q&A today with Elfi's final thoughts about how we're at a time of a kind of a 0 hour now here as well too, and that we have to rebuild, reimagine, see things anew, have different kinds of counter designs as we go forward, because we just can't continue to live the way we have before. So yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to pass things over here to Jed or Sarah.
Well, thank you everybody for watching today, for being here with us. Thank you Elfi, thank you, Monika, thank you, Alice, Jed, Dennis, for participating. And we wish you a wonderful rest of the summer and hope to see you for more film events in the fall. Please make sure to check out the films that we have in the retrospective. They're online through next weekend. And if you write us an email to the address I put in the chat, and that should also be in your Zoom confirmation that you received in your email, you get a chance to win free tickets.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else want to say anything?
Well, go ahead.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Can have a drink together now.
Oh, that would be great. I wish we could.
Wonderful seeing you all.
Okay. Hope we can have it in person soon, huh?
Yeah,
all right. Thank you.
Hopefully, yeah.
Thanks, Alice. Elfi, we talk later. Okay. Ciao.
Hi, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.